Maddie Head is on the Share Chair podcast. Welcome.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome. So before getting into Spring Lake, you moved around. You were in Lansing, you were moving around. So what was the cause of that moving around?
There was a lot of reasons. One of the big reasons was bullying. I was really heavily bullied when I was younger. And the other big reason was just financial situations. My mom and dad would get us out of a really bad school. Like my kindergarten, there was a metal detector on the door to my kindergarten classroom, just a really rough area. And then they'd move me to this Catholic school, and it would be nice for about half a year, and then we couldn't afford it, and we'd move back to a bad school. And it was just a lot of that, them trying to get us out of a poor situation and not being able to. At times we'd stay at a school for like up to 2 years, but it was never very long. Like I remember moving from one school, and this kid's like, who was my friend, I think his name was Gabriel. He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna miss you so much," and everything. And I'm like, why is it a big deal? I'm just moving. I mean, I realized I wasn't gonna see him again, but I didn't think that was that big of a deal. I was just so used to never seeing people for very long.
And so now you've been at Spring Lake since you were in 6th grade.
Yes.
And you're a senior now, so it's like that's the longest run you've had.
A solid 6 years.
Cool. As a senior, what are your plans for next year?
Oh, man. I'm going to be going to MCC just because I have no idea what I want to do yet, and I have absolutely no way to afford an actual college. I mean, FAFSAs are only going to help so much. So.
Yeah. So when you, so FAFSA is could you maybe talk about that or that process? Did you go down the FAFSA road? Did you try?
We definitely filled out our regular FAFSA forms and everything, and it took a little bit longer because I was homeless for a portion of the beginning of this year, so we had to fill out the whole section that most people don't have to fill out. But it was just basically sat down on the computer with my mom and filled it out, and they expect 0 family contribution, things like that, which is nice, but.
Would you mind speaking about the homelessness that you experienced? So you're a high school senior and you're without a
first
home?
Week of high school senior, and I was living with my aunts. My mom had just gotten out of rehab, and home was not a safe place for her, nor for me or my brother. So we moved to stay with my aunt for a while, and we were couch jumping for a minute until we could eventually get the house back and have my dad move out and things like that. So,
has your family always struggled with financial
that's
things?
Kind of the weird thing. We've not always struggled, but I feel like it almost feels like we've always struggled because we've just kind of cycled. I mean, we've definitely had chunks of time where we were more of upper middle class, and then we'd move or something would happen in the family that would cause one of them to lose their jobs, one of my parents, and then before we know it, we're on food stamps again and trying to figure out how we're going to pay rent the next month. And it was a lot of instability. You never knew if you were coming home and had a ton of money or if you were coming home to getting your lights turned off.
Is there someone you really leaned on?
Honestly, that's the thing about poverty is you have to lean on people if you want to make it out. And I've ended up leaning on a lot of family members, a lot of my aunts and uncles, my cousins, as have my mom and my brother. It's really the only way you can get through something like that. I guess the biggest thing for me when I was younger was just treating me like a kid and not like a poor kid. It would be like they treated me just the same and be mindful, not necessarily hey, we're going to Michigan Adventures, you want to come, but you have to pay. They knew I couldn't pay, so they wouldn't do something like that. But at the same time, it wouldn't be oh, she's different than us, she can't afford the same things. They just treated me the same. They'd play with me at recess and things and not point out the fact that I wore the same outfit for 3 days in a row. And
your mom recently coming out of rehab, and then also the word cycle came up where you would have money and then you might not the next day. Where does that stem from?
Just my parents made some not so smart life decisions before having me or my brother. And so they never really got a stable job, and that really made the cycling thing big. I mean, my mom has worked as a waitress basically my entire life. And the big thing with waiting tables is you live off tips. So if you get really good tips and it's really busy, well then we're in a great financial situation. But then if she doesn't get any tips at all, we have no money because servers' minimum wage is just enough to pay federal taxes, and that's about it. A few years where my dad was unemployed, a year where my mom was unemployed, so that really hurt with the financial situation. And it also definitely put a lot of stress on my parents, which led my mom to the point where she needed to go to rehab and had those problems.
So when I think of holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, a lot of nostalgic feelings come up, and like I think of turkey and expensive gifts and things that cost money. And so just to give like a person who has never had to deal with the things that you've experienced and grown and gotten strong from, like what is a holiday like for someone who doesn't have as much money as people in Spring Lake per se?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And that definition really changed throughout the years. I mean, a lot of times there was a lot of fighting over money. There would just be a lot of fights around the holidays. Holidays always aggravated the situation where we were reminded constantly, like, you don't have enough money to do what everyone else does. And like things like Christmas, my mom always would try to go the extra mile to make sure my brother and I had gifts under the tree. That was her big thing. She always wanted it to be a big thing for us, but I also remember years where it wasn't. I would come downstairs and there'd be maybe 5 gifts under the tree. And like half of them came from the dollar store.
Yeah.
And I tried to pretend to be like, oh yeah, it's great, because my mom's crying and sad. And holidays were always a bad reminder about our situation, but it wasn't also an end-all be-all either. I mean, we had family and things like get-togethers, especially around Thanksgiving, where the family would just be there and like remind us we're also loved. And if you don't stay positive, it really consumes you. It's really hard to live with nothing.
So how do you do it? How have you stayed positive? Would you say you have?
I honestly don't think I would say I have. I mean, I've struggled a lot with mental illness and a lot with depression and things like that. And I think it's still something I'm working on too, like just basically keeping a smile on. Like, I don't have a bed right now, but I'm also just like thinking, well, at least I have a house, I have a roof over my head. And just, I guess the best way to stay grateful and happy is just to remember what you do have. But there are going to be days where you can't stay positive. It's impossible. And you got to learn how to live with that as well.
You're 18, MCC's on the horizon, high school graduation, what is supposed to be this great, like, sort of passage from one thing to the next, right, from adolescence to adulthood. Does that ring true for you? Does it have that adolescent to adulthood feel? Does it not? If it does it excite you? Like, how's this transition from adolescence to adulthood feeling to you?
Yeah, I would say it's really not so much a transition of adolescence to adulthood as much as from high school to college, like the literal just high school to college. I feel like I had to become an adult much younger than most kids did. I mean, like, I'll talk to kids and they're like, oh, remember this thing from our childhood? And I remember that thing is something that I was too old for, like Hannah Montana or something. I was already like an adult by that point. I didn't get to enjoy that. So I would say I was like probably an adult by the time I was 10.
So we are coming to graduation and all that jazz, but instead of looking to the future, are there positive things you can look back on high school and say, wow, that's something I'll remember, like that was a good thing, or a friend, or something positive?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is just most of the things that we have here don't cost money, and just remembering to enjoy those things as much as you have the other things going on. So like things like hanging out with friends are things I'll always remember, and there are memories from band and band camp and things like that I will always remember, and just happy things like that. Yeah. Great teachers that I'll always remember, like Mr. Tooney or Mrs. Clark.
You mentioned one point sometimes running out of food stamps. What is that feeling like when you think maybe I won't be able to eat food tonight?
The feeling is scary. It's really a scary thought, like, what are we going to eat tonight? The biggest thing, though, is my mom made sure we never went hungry. That was, like, her one thing, and she always was trying to keep her dignity with poverty. She would be afraid to ask help on certain things, but when it came to my brother and my safety or our well-being, she was not afraid to just lose all of her dignity and get us help.
Yeah.
So there'd be times where if we ran out of food stamps, she would say, go to, like, a food truck and get us food, or she would ask one of her sisters to just lend some food so we could eat that day. People look down on you when you're poor. People think like, oh, they think you're lazy or something. I remember once being at a doctor's office and the doctor asked me, like, just in a passing question, what I was doing that summer. And at the time I had no clue yet, so I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe just like hanging out with friends. He's like, well, you better do something academic or else you'll end up in a place like your mom. And like my mom was just blown away, and he's like, you don't want to be poor like her forever. And it just talked crap about my mom with her right there in the room. And
Yes.
a lot of people who have money don't understand. They think you're just lazy, or they think you're not trying, and that's where the shame comes from. You're afraid of what people are going to think of you because they can't know your full story. They don't know that you're working way more than most people are, and that you're working from 6 in the morning until like 1 in the morning. They don't know these things. The vast majority of people who are poor are just trying to get by, and they're trying so hard all the time. Like, appreciate your family, and friends count as family as well. Anyone who is willing to be there for you, you need to cherish those people and really cherish, like, look out for them as much as they look out for you, and be there for them whenever you can. And the other biggest thing is just to never judge someone. You don't know what they're going through. They could be the meanest person on earth, but you don't know what's going on at home. You can never know everything that's going on inside their head or inside their family life or anything. So that's the biggest thing for me, is just cherish people and never judge people.
Congratulations on graduation.
Oh, thank you.
Proud of you.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so
awesome.
much.
And thanks for being on Share Chair.
It's great to meet you.
Thanks, meet you too.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Share Chair. Stay tuned next week for a new episode.